As you can see, in terms of preaching, we have the B team in today. Kathleen is away. And I should have greeted you all. I know there are a few visitors here today, and I just want you to feel very welcome in being here. We're delighted to have you, so I hope you make yourself at home and know that there are refreshments following our service. The scripture lesson this morning comes from the Gospel of John. It's an interesting story, one that you wonder if it embarrassed the early church. It is said to have been an authentic experience of Jesus, but it has, when they were canonizing the Bible, they put it in different places. But we are reading it where it has landed, now from John's Gospel. Then everyone went home, but Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early the next morning, he went to the temple. All the people gathered around him, and he sat down and he began to teach them. The leaders of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman who had been caught committing adultery, and they made her stand before them all. "Teacher," they said to Jesus, "this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. In our law, Moses commanded that such a woman must be stoned to death. Now, what do you say?" They said this to trap Jesus, so that they could accuse him. But he bent over and wrote on the ground with his finger. As they stood there asking him questions, he finally straightened up and said to them, "Whichever one of you has committed no sin, then you may throw the first stone at her." Then he bent over again and wrote on the ground. And when they heard this, they all left one by one, the older ones first. Jesus was left alone with the woman still standing there. He straightened up and then said to her, "Where are they? Is there no one left to condemn you?" "No one, sir," she answered. "Well then," Jesus said, "I do not condemn you either. Go, but do not sin again." This is the word of the Lord. I have to be honest and tell you that I wrote this sermon 3 years ago. At the Zephyr Hills Church, they would always ask me if I would portray a woman once a year. Act out a woman once a year. I am a woman, obviously. And I always said yes. So I do the ones that are very popular, like Sarah, like Mary, like Martha, those. The last year that I was there, I said, how about I'll do the adulterous woman? And the pastor kind of lifted her eyebrows and said, "Okay." So I want to share that with you now. You have heard my story from John's Gospel, but you don't really know all the story. You don't know my name. You don't know all of the parts about it. You just know that I had a life-threatening experience. But there weren't any explanations given. And the demands that accusers were made were not all right. But I will share my story with you. It's a story about judgment. It's also a story about amazing grace and about forgiveness. It's a story about where people with unequal standing in society maybe kind of had equal sin. Well, when they came and grabbed me, I knew that I was in trouble. Yes, it was wrong. I knew that. But I also knew that I would end up taking the blame for everything. The man ran off. Did they pursue him? No, they never did. I wanted to ask, why me? Why just me? And yet I didn't have a chance to do that. I had to own up to what had happened, and I knew that they were going to charge me. On the way to the temple, they shoved me, they pushed me, and I thought, these are people bent on ending my life. It's going to be like this. The people along the way, they watched, they gawked, they pointed their fingers, they called me ugly names. I thought to myself, we women, we're just property. We're men's property. We must do what men bid us to do. Well, the religious leaders brought me into the temple area and shoved me in front of this rabbi, and I guess his name was Jesus. There were a lot of people there early in the morning in order to hear him, and the ranks closed around me, and there I was, standing ashamed and embarrassed in front of this rabbi. He was a man. Surely he would agree with everything that they said. So the religious leaders made their case. They said, she must be stoned. This is Moses' law. Well, I don't know a lot about law, but I know somewhat about it from what other people have said. And I know that in the Torah, it says 2 or 3 times, both the man and the woman must be punished for this act. They must suffer. And where was the man? It was just me. I wondered if the man was standing in the crowd someplace calling for my death in order to prevent his own. But also in the Torah, it says there has to be 2 or 3 witnesses. There were no witnesses. There were the only scribes and Pharisees that had gotten their word from somebody. There wasn't any witnesses at all. Adultery, they shouted. Stone her, they clamored. And then they waited for Jesus' verdict. What was he going to say? You see, the Romans had outlawed those laws, or that kind of punishment. And if he agreed with the bloodthirsty mob, then he would have to answer to those laws. But the Jews, they all believed that that was adequate punishment for that act. And if he was going to have to deal with them and all their particular wrath. So I held my breath. I just was afraid that this was going to be my last. And then amazingly, this Jesus did a very unusual thing. He bent over and he started writing something in the dusty sand with his finger. And people looked to see if they could figure out what it was that he was writing. I just wondered what I should do. But is doing that stop all the arguing? Was he angry? Was he trying to disengage himself from the rest of the crowd? Was he saying, I will not stand with you in condemning this woman? I just didn't know. They kept badgering him. Jesus, what do you say? What do you say? My knees started to crumble, and I eventually fell to the ground. Then Jesus stood up. And he said something very unusual, not to me, but to them. Said, "Are there any of you that have not sinned? If so, you go ahead and throw a stone at her." He had moved from the mob mentality to the individual responsibility. And then he knelt back down again, and he wrote again in the sand, and I just knew it was coming. It was coming. And then I heard the shuffle of feet, and I started coughing because dust was rising up, and I looked, and they were leaving. They were leaving. Even the scribes and the Pharisees seemed to be leaving. They didn't challenge Jesus at all. It just made me wonder. Jesus had told them to look at themselves rather than look at me. Was he unwilling to rank sins? And instead he was willing to point out their hypocrisy? And then, in my shame, I wondered, when things like this happen and people feel shame, is it always one-sided in order that the others won't feel any responsibility? Well, Jesus stood back up. He helped me stand up. There were tears rolling down my cheeks. And he said to me, "Woman, where are they? Is no one willing to condemn you?" And I could hardly speak. But then I said, "No one. No one. They're gone." And Jesus said, "Well, I don't condemn you, but you do have to go and live a different life. You can't do that." Well, I knew I was free, but I knew the change wouldn't be easy. For after all, I'm property. I'm property of a man. And I have no value, and I have very few choices. I knew that I would always be accountable to the sins that were defined by men, even though they were not willing to stand by the same standards themselves. What if a soldier came? Did I have any rights? No. What if a neighbor did? Do I have any rights? No, I do not. But Jesus said, "My past will not go unforgiven. It was wrong, but it will not bind my future." You see, the scribes and the Pharisees were willing to bend the rules in order that they could condemn me, test Jesus, even if it cost somebody their life. It didn't matter. Are we humans always willing to compromise the rules to fit ourselves and make it a judgment against somebody else? But Jesus, you see, had stripped away their hypocrisy and had provided me with tremendous mercy. I think we should always be grateful that the early Christians were willing to put this story in the Bible and help us deal with it and see the wideness of the mercy of God. I have to go now. You each have a stone. Take it in your hand and look at it. Is there anyone that doesn't have a stone? We all carry stones, if not literally, to throw them at people. But we carry hurts that we want to hurl at people And sometimes those kind of stones, they're the ones that hurt the most. They're the ones that we want to judge other people, but not hold ourselves accountable. So look at your stone and think, for whom might my stone be intended? Who might I be willing to judge others and look down upon with either my actions or my words or my gossip with somebody? Who in my mind do I always cut down without looking at myself or without knowing the whole story? If you are without sin, cast the first stone. Throw it at somebody. It's true for us today as it is back then. When you leave, there will be people at each door. You need to make a choice. Do you want to keep your stone and hurl it at that person when you have an opportunity? Or do you want to leave it behind and go and live a different kind of life? Because when you make that confession as a follower of Jesus Christ, there is grace in your life, and there is mercy. And I think you will hear them. I do not condemn you. Go